Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing us another fantasy football episode. This one, I'm going to go over my tight end rankings and breaking them into a tier list for you guys. So I'm going to go through my top 20 tight ends and sort of show you guys where I think the tier breaks are across the position. Generally speaking, I think that tier lists or tier-based rankings are going to be the best way to go when you enter your draft. It gives you the ability to identify where those huge drop-offs are from one player to the next, and it helps you sort of identify which player or which position you should be targeting, just based off of where you're at in the draft. If you're like near the turn and there's 5 great running backs left in the same tier, there's only 1 wide receiver, that's a good tell that you should be looking to take the last wide receiver in that tier. And it just also helps you to understand where those true value drop-offs are and where the best spots, those sweet spots are for taking each player. So hopefully you guys enjoy. I've already put out the quarterback and running back tier list, so this one will come out right after those. And then we'll go over the wide receiver tier list shortly after this one. So stay tuned for that, and let's get involved here. Let's go. We'll start things off here with tier 1 for the tight end position. I think it's pretty consensus on this one. You've got Brock Bowers and Trey McBride. Both these guys have a great opportunity to finish as the tight end 1 this season. I personally have Brock Bowers ahead of Trey McBride. I just think everything's set up for him to go out there and command a 30 to 35% target share in this offense. We saw Kubiak do a great job of just hyper-targeting his best player in Seattle last season with JSN, and I don't think there's any reason to expect things to be different here in Vegas, where the number 2 target on this team is probably Gaston Genti, to be honest. You've got Jalen Naylor there, Trey Tucker. There's nothing there that's going to concern you. This is Brock Bowers' team from a passing standpoint, and the overall quarterback play really can't be worse than it was last season. I know you're going to deal with the quarterback change for Bowers at some point, likely going from Cousins to Mendoza, but that is not as scary given that at least you're transitioning to the number 1 quarterback drafted this offseason. As to where on the flip side with Trey McBride, you've got a little bit more target competition. Not that Harrison or Wilson are going to steal too many targets from McBride, but they are much better than the competition that Brock Bowers is dealing with. And then there's the fear of Carson Beck coming in. I know Carson Beck looked great in the Hall of Fame game, but at some point we're probably going to see Carson Beck play football this season, and I'm just not that confident that a 3rd-round drafted quarterback can really sustain high-end production for this offense the same way Jacoby Brissett can, and I think that's why that I would certainly prefer Bowers to McBride, but both these guys are amazing. They're incredibly talented, and they could both be really good for fantasy this season. In tier 2, I had to put Colston Loveland in his own tier. The reason I did that is because I think Colston Loveland kind of belongs with the guys that we're going to talk about in tier 3 in terms of what my overall expectation is for him this season. But I think he has upside beyond what the other guys in that tier, in tier 3, are going to offer. I think there is a chance that Colston Loveland goes out there and puts up a tight end 1 season this year, especially with the injury to Luther Burden. Loveland's going to be even more involved in this offense, and he's explosive and talented enough that he really could go out there and join Bowers and McBride in tier 1, and I don't really think the guys that we're going to touch on in tier 3 can do that. So that's why Colston Loveland for me is in a tier of his own this season. Obviously, he's my tight end 3. I think he's going to be phenomenal, but the range of outcomes is obviously a little bit wider for him, I think, than for the guys that we're going to talk about in tier 3. In tier 3, I am calling this the tier of players or tight ends that have a great chance to finish 3rd. So that's why Colston Loveland ended up making his own tier, is because I think he's got a shot to crack the top 2 at the tight end position. I think he could potentially leapfrog either Brock Bowers or Trey McBride. I don't think any of the guys in tier 3 can do that. Those guys are going to be Tyler Warren, Harold Fannin, and Sam Laporta. Tyler Warren is going to be hyper-targeted in his own right. I'm just not very confident in the offense continuing to be as good as it was over the first half of last season. But I think Warren's probably going to see a 25% target share. He's still got Alec Pierce banged up with off-season ankle surgery. Michael Pittman's gone. Josh Downs, we don't know how well he can command targets when he's playing on the outside. Tyler Warren should be the number 1 target for this team, and I think he'll be great in PPR. I just don't know that you're really going to get that sort of spike season that you could get out of Colston Loveland. Harold Fannin, really similar to Tyler Warren, really. He's the best pass catcher on the team. He's going to be hyper-targeted, but he's just going to be limited by the offense, so I don't know that he can go out there and be a top 2 tight end this season. Then Sam Laporta, kind of the opposite of Warren and Fannin in that he's not necessarily going to be hyper-targeted, but I do think there's a good chance he ends up on the best offense in the NFL this season in the Detroit Lions. Still going to be the clear number 3 target in the offense, so he'll probably see around 100 targets, maybe a little bit less this season. But the upside for Laporta is that he could catch 12, 15 touchdowns if everything breaks right. We've seen him put up a tight end 1 season before. Obviously, it was a low-scoring season for the tight end position that year, but Laporta really could go out there and score double-digit touchdowns, and if you do that, you're probably going to be a top 3 tight end, and that's why I think he does belong in this tier. Tier 4 kind of speaks for itself at the tight end position. It's just going to be the injured studs. You know all about both Tucker Kraft and George Kittle. Both these guys have an incredibly wide range of outcomes. I think both these guys could go out there and be a top 2 tight end this season. We've seen George Kittle be the tight end 1 before, and he's not quite aged out just yet. And then Tucker Kraft was on pace to be the tight end 1 last season before he left with an ACL injury. George Kittle, obviously coming off the torn Achilles, it's tough to really bank on him being the same player immediately following. We know that Achilles are really brutal injuries for players to come back from, but George Kittle's a dog. He could definitely go out there and play at a high level this season, and because of that, I think I'm okay drafting him where he's going. It's just got to understand there's a good chance he's especially not going to perform at a high level to start the season. Then Tucker Kraft, coming off the torn ACL, target competition isn't very hard there in Green Bay. He's dealing with Christian Watson, Matthew Golden, and Jaden Reed. None of those guys are established enough to be concerned of. I do think that Tucker Kraft maybe has more upside even than George Kittle. I think he could go out there and be a top 3 tight end this season. It's just, again, coming off a torn ACL, probably seems like he's going to be ready for week 1, but it's just tough to put him above the guys in tier 3 because of that risk with the injury here. Tier 5, the tight end position, we got 5 players that I just think are kind of boring. They're the kind of players that you're going to draft with the idea that you can start every single week, but that just probably aren't going to be difference makers at the position. The headliner for this list is obviously Kyle Pitts. He's going to be super consistent this season, should go out there and be a usable tight end every single week, but I just don't know that he's ever going to be a true difference maker. He's the number 2 target and number 3 weapon on a really bad offense, but he's a good player. It's obviously not living up to the hype that he had when he was drafted to be, the next Travis Kelce, the next Rob Gronkowski. That clearly didn't happen, not anywhere near the same way that Brock Bowers has burst onto the scene. So that's certainly disappointing for Kyle Pitts, but I do still think he's going to be usable on a weekly basis. It's just I don't draft much of him because I want to get ceiling at my tight end spot. Typically speaking, there's not a huge difference between the tight end 8 and the tight end 20. So at that point, you might as well just stream the position, and it makes spending a decent draft pick on Kyle Pitts not very interesting to me. Dallas Goedert, kind of boring as well. Actually, maybe has a little bit more upside than I'm giving him credit for. With the departure of A.J. Brown, you've already got Mekhi Lemon and Devonta Smith banged up. Dallas Goedert could be a super important part of this Eagles offense, so he ends up being one of my favorite picks late. But again, I don't think he's necessarily got any more upside than Kittle or Kraft or any of the guys in tier 3 or higher. So he belongs in this tier. He could certainly run hot with touchdowns and be good this season, but you're going to need a high-end touchdown output season for him to be good for fantasy. Isaiah Likely has some upside here. He could easily break out this season given that he is the starting tight end now for the New York Giants. I'm just worried about what this Giants offense is going to look like from a passing standpoint. Malik Neighbors is clearly going to be the number 1 target, and they probably want to run the ball a lot with both Jackson Dart and Cam Scadabo. That means that being the number 2 target here maybe isn't even all that useful, and they've got several tight ends in New York that they love. I know Likely's good, but they've also got Theo Johnson and Cody Bellinger who are involved as well. They're going to run a lot of 2 tight end sets there, and Likely should potentially be the number 2 target, but I just don't see a huge ceiling for him this year. Jake Ferguson, he's the number 3 target in an offense, so it's tough for him to be amazing, but this could be a really good offense. So he's kind of like a poor man's Sam Laporta, and that he could get lucky with touchdowns. Just, not as good of a player as Laporta, and it's probably a slightly worse offense in Dallas. And then Dalton Kincaid, he belongs in this tier for me. He doesn't really fit the boring mold because I think there's still some unknown with Dalton Kincaid. If you look at yards per route run, he was one of the best players in the NFL last season. Just played 28% of the snaps for the Bills because he just couldn't be healthy and stay on the field. If he's fully healthy, if he's a full-time player, Kincaid could potentially go out there and be really good for fantasy this season. It's just tough to guarantee that because he's had a hard time being relevant in the past. Next up in tier 6 for the tight end position, we've got just a couple old players that are probably a lot closer to the guys in tier 4 and 5 than they really deserve, or at least in tier 5, and I'm giving them credit for. But they're players that are going to be used in their offense, but just don't have any sort of reliable ceiling. Those guys are going to be Travis Kelce, Mark Andrews, and Hunter Henry. Travis Kelce, obviously a year older, was not super great last season, but he is tied to Patrick Mahomes. There's not really a whole lot of target competition there, so at least the path from what I can see for Kelce going out there and being really good is just maybe he gets a spike touchdown season. You could potentially see him go out there and score 10 touchdowns because Mahomes is his quarterback, and potentially this offense takes a return to form there. So that's possible for Travis Kelce, but generally speaking, I just think he's a descending player. I think we'll probably see the snap share drop for him again this season, and it's just going to make it tough for you to really start him every single week. Mark Andrews, it's the same exact thing. You did have the departure of Isaiah Likely, so maybe he'll go out there and be a little bit more involved from a passing standpoint than he was last season. But the reality is with Mark Andrews, you're going to play him. You're going to need him to score a touchdown to be good for fantasy. And if he doesn't, he's going to be horrendous. So I prefer to not draft tight ends like that unless you're really just playing the matchups. But he's more of a streaming option for me than anything else. Then Hunter Henry, similar. He's the number 3 target in a good offense. Needs to be involved in the end zone to be good for fantasy. And he certainly could. He definitely has some spike weeks over the course of the year. We do like this Patriots offense. So again, I think you can play Hunter Henry. But again, he's more of a streaming option than anything else for me. And to close things out here, there were 4 tight ends that I didn't mention in that top 16 that I felt still needed to be mentioned as guys to keep an eye on. So we'll start things off with Brenton Strange. Again, there's so many pass catchers in Jacksonville that it's tough to really bet on a super high target share for Strange here. But Strange is a guy that was a priority for him. They gave him an extension this offseason. He's still just 25, so he's an ascending player. He could easily go out there and be probably the number 3 target for this team. I think it's possible that you see whatever 2 wide receivers end up playing outside regularly outperform him. But then Brenton Strange could easily be really good for fantasy as well. This is an offense we expect big things out of, and he's an athletic player. Could easily put up a spike season, so he just needs to be mentioned as at least a guy that you're probably streaming on a regular basis. Kenyon Sadiq, I'm only mentioning him because he's a freak athlete and he's a rookie. He's a Jet, but there's at least a path for him to potentially be the number 2 target in that offense behind Garrett Wilson. If you're a freak athlete and the number 2 target in an offense that's probably going to be throwing the ball a ton, there's at least a ceiling case for Sadiq. He is dealing with a hernia injury, so he's probably going to miss a little bit more training camp. You don't love that for rookies, so it's tough to really bet on that. But if we see Sadiq go out there and get 6-7 targets in week 1, pay attention to that because he's an explosive player, and if he gets opportunity, he could be good for fantasy. Oronde Gadsden, we haven't gotten a whole lot of news out of him this offseason, which is certainly not great. They also added Charlie Kolar along with David Njoku, so there's a lot of risk associated with Gadsden. He could easily be the number 3 tight end on this offense and not see the field very much, but we saw a stretch from him last season that you just don't see out of very many tight ends ever, so knowing that he's got that ceiling tied to Mike McDaniel and the Chargers offense, if we see him go out there in week 1 and have a legitimate role, he could immediately be a guy that just jumps up the boards and ends up being a really high priority waiver ad. Then Jawan Johnson, the number 3 target now with Jordan Tyson in town, takes a lot of pressure off of him. I think he's a good player, but not a great player. So when you're given forced into that number 2 role, it's a little bit tough for these players to succeed. You're going to have a lot of passing volume in general for this team. I think, again, they're probably going to be like the poor man's Bengals, that they'll be down so much they'll have to throw the ball a ton. And Jawan Johnson's a good enough player. He's been valuable before. I think he's a guy to at least keep an eye on as a decent streaming option from week to week here. So that'll do it for the tight end rankings and tier list. Up next, we're going to go over my wide receiver tiers and rankings. So stay tuned for that video. That one should come out 2 days from now. So that one will come out. And if you haven't already, make sure you guys go check out my running back and quarterback rankings. If you have any disagreements or questions or comments, let me know in the comments below. I really do love interacting with you guys there. And then we're going to get into a lot more fun stuff. We're going to do more mock drafts, some must-draft players. I'll go over all the players that I'm drafting most frequently in my drafts this season. Just tons of draft strategy, draft content coming out over the next month. And then we're only 4 weeks away from football now, so it's super exciting. We're getting really close. I believe we're actually 4 weeks and a day away from the open. I guess 4 weeks from today because it's Wednesday away from opening kickoff. So that's super exciting. Make sure you guys stick around. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so you get more videos. It's all free. We're putting this out all season long. And if you guys stick around, hopefully we can win some championships together. So I appreciate you guys, and I will catch you with the next one. Peace.